Hey everyone, today I want to show the underside of my Shelby GT500. I wanted to take a look under this thing and see how it differs from the 350R, and I also wanted to check just to make sure there were no problems with the car. So up front, obviously you have the splitter. I put my slip lows on. In one of my last accessory videos, you could see the 3 rows of slip lows I have. I also did it under the splitter wicker, so these are actually doing a really nice job. They saved the 350 splitter, and I'm sure they're going to save this one at some point. And obviously you have the belly pan going back. You have your access door here for your oil filter. The front suspension setup. The 500's got a different steering geometry than most of the 350s. The 350Rs for 2020 are the only ones that got an identical setup. That was a last minute thing that Ford did. Looks to be pretty similar under here. Magnetized suspension, 6-piston Brembos. The setup looks pretty similar. And here you see all your steering linkage, motor mounts. You can see the exhaust manifold up top. If you ever want to know if one of these Shelby's 350s or 500s has the original engine, here's the last 8 characters of the VIN. They punch it on the side of the block, driver's side, rear. So that's how you can tell if the engine is original or not. With these 500s versus the 350s, they went to an actual metal oil pan with a traditional threaded plug instead of the plastic one they were using. Let's see, here's the starter motor. These caps pop off sometimes, so every once in a while, if you're under the car, just check to make sure that cap doesn't pop off. If it does, it's not a big deal, just put it back in place, but many owners have reported those to come off. Basically the same on the other side. Here's some of the vents they incorporate for the braking system. Looks like the tank for the washer fluid is over there. You can see the back side of the radiator behind the wheel. Same setup on the other side, just a mirrored image of itself. One thing I noticed that a couple owners had brought up on some of the forums is there are sometimes imperfections. You can kind of see right here on the carbon wheels. This is not a structural thing, it's a cosmetic thing, almost like there were some maybe little tiny bubbles inside of the resin when they molded it. Many other owners of carbon fiber track packs have reported that. That's really not an issue. And there's also some weave imperfections, but since it's on the back of the wheel, they don't really care about that. And this is considered good because on the front side, everything looks perfect. You see where the subframe for the front mounts to the chassis. One thing I did notice is they did put some extra heat shielding on the 500s. This was not on my 350, and they also have one in the back closer to the fuel filter. So the fuel lines run here in this little plastic shield. Catalytic converters. Obviously, one of the main differences is going to be the transmission. So you have the Tremec transmission here. There were issues with leaks on the transmission lines for the 20s and the 21 GT500s. I did notice that this piece is blue now. This used to be silver, so that might have been a redesign. So if you ever get under your 500, you definitely want to check to see if these lines are leaking. That is an issue on the first 2 years of production for this car. Heat shielding on the side to protect from the exhaust system. You have this plastic pan on the bottom. I wish it wasn't plastic because there's always a susceptibility. You run over something and that's all your transmission fluid is in here, so you got to be kind of mindful of that. Flex joints for the exhaust system, lots of heat shielding. You can see where my jacking rails are that I put on a couple weeks ago. You can see above that all the seam sealer. So the chassis, as you would expect, is basically the same. Before they put a tow hook on the 500, this was supposed to be the original location for when you're using a bridle strap to tow these cars. So here's all the wiring in the back of the transmission mount. Pretty standard stuff. Pretty big exhaust system, has an X pipe built into it. These do have resonators on them. This car's pretty loud. I expect this car to be a little bit quieter having resonators on it compared to my 350R, but I think this car is actually louder in normal mode than my 350R is. If it's not, it's pretty darn close. Here is your fuel filter for when it's service time. You should take that plastic pan down. That's not a big deal to service that. Fuel tank is split side to side. Here are the fuel tank straps. So you can also see the carbon fiber drive shaft kind of hiding up there. So that's a really cool thing. They did help reduce that rotational weight. It also stiffens up the drivetrain. Have a cast iron differential housing, so that's going to be really, really strong. All the various suspension components. The Shelby's used a lot more aluminum in the suspension than the standard Mustangs. Subframe mounts for the rear suspension system. There's the electronic parking brake actuator and module. Half shafts, differential mounts, springs. Shocks are closer outboard in the rear. Mounts for the rear pan support. Here's all your bungs for your diff coolers out and in. Aluminum cover on the back of the differential. These are all going to have torsion diffs in them, the 500s. Rear sway bar. See the rear caliper there. CS550 8.8 information on there. Rear muffler. Just like on the 350s, you have this rear pan has these two kick-ups on it. These go directly to the transmission or the rear differential cooler. You can see here how it comes up there, goes through the cooler, and then it exhausts out the back. You can see the pump for the cooler there. Mufflers. So with the 500s, the tips are built into the muffler. On the 350s, they were integrated into the bumper, but they do put a small gap here. Basically, as an air gap to help act as insulation, so you don't melt the plastic above it. So that's one difference. The tips are not integrated on this car. Here's the exhaust vents for the cooler. You can see the cooler on the back side. Center mounted reverse light. And same setup on the other side. So obviously some differences between the 350 and the 500, mainly in the drivetrain. A couple little differences here and there I noticed, nothing too crazy, a little bit more heat shielding, just because I imagine this car generates a lot more heat, and they probably learned some lessons with the 350, but for the most part, everything as you would expect since it's based on the same S550 chassis. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.